It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and I'm the co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure that you can catch every Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Welcome to the new year, and what better way to start a brand new calendar of Monster Mondays episodes, which is a series that has often talked about the big guy often in the past, than to basically jump in at the start of one of Godzilla's reboots with the first film in the Millennium Era, Godzilla 2000. Despite the name Godzilla 2000, the film actually came out in Japan in 1999. However, it did get a North American theaters release in the summer of 2000. In fact, in the early weeks of my time working at General Cinema from 2000 to 2005, it actually played at my theater, and this was the first U.S. theatrically released Godzilla movie since Godzilla 1985, and the last to really have a at least semi-wide release until 2016's Shin Godzilla. Now in Japan, Godzilla 2000 came out only 4 years after Godzilla vs. Destroyer, which killed the Godzilla of the Heisei period. Many people believe, or at least have the inclination to think, that Toho, the studio who owns the Godzilla character, put Godzilla 2000 together as a response to the disappointment that was Roland Emmerich's American Godzilla film released in 1998. And to be fair, I'm not entirely sure the correlation between that disappointment of the American version and the quick pre-production decision only weeks after the release of Emmerich's are really all that connected. I tend to see this from two different angles. First, I really do think Toho already had plans to do a new Godzilla to ride a little of the coattails from the American version being released. Second, even if the American Godzilla film had been better, there would have still been a desire to see Toho bring back their monster star, and that's exactly what they did. Shogo Tomiyama, the executive producer of the Godzilla films at the time, hired two past writers of films in the series. Hiroshi Kashiwabara, writer of Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and Wataru Mimura, writer of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. They were tasked to create a new movie, and they wanted to really kind of try something different this time around. The Millennium series is actually made up of some interesting concepts that fundamentally changes the Godzilla character, but not in ways that are all that offensive to fans. One of the ideas that the trio behind the film had was to bring Godzilla back down to his original size of 170 feet. They felt that the distance between Big G and the humans had grown too large. It was a way to basically reconnect the monsters to the victims below. Now, with the script in place and the look of Godzilla down, director Takeo Okawara was brought in to bring the film to life. Now, Okawara had long been associated with the series since the return of Godzilla in 1984, which that film itself was known as Godzilla 1985 when it was imported here and re-edited for the American audience. He had actually directed the previous film, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, and a couple of the other Heisei period films. And the approach was pretty simple. The Millennium Era would ultimately have 6 films, and to the exception of 2 of the films I'll talk about later this month, the series were all standalone sequels to only the original 1954 Godzilla film. I've covered one of them previously in a past episode of the podcast, way back at the beginning of this series, and that one was Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. So I'll touch upon that one later on in this month when it's appropriate. So here we go. Godzilla 2000 begins with the Godzilla Prediction Network setting up some equipment. And this network believes it can, with the proper amount of research, predict monster activity. And why is this the case? Well, it's because, as I previously mentioned, Godzilla has been a little bit reimagined and is really kind of seen now as a literal force of nature. Think of this opening as something like Twister, but with giant monsters that can shoot atomic breath. The Godzilla Prediction Network is just a man and his daughter. With them on this excursion is a news reporter who's looking for a story about Godzilla for her career. Off the coast, a storm is brewing and bringing lots of activity that feels a little seismic in nature. And when a boat that was due to come in arrives, it's in the mouth of Big G himself, and out from his eyes shoots the title Godzilla 2000. And Godzilla then makes landfall and continues to rampage through this coastal town, basically laying waste to everything around him. This also nearly kills our duo from the GPN and the reporter as well. Luckily, they do get a nice close-up look at the Big G, but when the reporter begins snapping pictures, the flash from her camera angers the monster and he starts attacking, and the trio barely escape with their lives. Now, they do continue to follow Godzilla, but at a safe enough distance as it destroys the town near where he surfaced. And it's a neat scene because it isn't just the classic people running away from Godzilla stuff that we expect, but it also shows how much trouble he creates wherever he goes. He typically leaves fire and explosions. He knocks out the power. He leaves the city in utter darkness. In fact, our lead character and head of the GPN, Yuji, spots that maybe, just maybe, Godzilla is specifically targeting humans' power supplies as the monster goes straight for a power transformer and destroys it. Now next, we meet another group of scientists that make up the organization called Crisis Control Intelligence, or CCI. They have discovered something quite interesting, a millions of years old object that lies underwater. The next day, our reporter character, Yuki, has to return to join the father and daughter team from the GPN because when she took the photos of Godzilla, they were completely and totally wiped clean by Godzilla's radiation, so she has a bunch of negatives of nothing. So while she returns to find out if she can indeed join them, Yuji is learning about some mysterious temperature increases in a specific part of the ocean near the coast. We find that CCI is also attempting to lift their mysterious millions of years old object from the water to exploit it for more fossil fuel sources. However, this object begins to rise to the surface under its own power, ultimately destroying the CCI's machines that are lifting it. Now, while CCI investigates this mysterious object, Godzilla begins moving inland towards a nuclear power plant that he will ultimately attempt to destroy. The lead of the CCI, Katagiri, and Yuji from the GPN are both headed to the same place, and we find out that these two characters of Yuji and Katagiri knew each other. They both had an interest in Godzilla, but they had different ideas about what to do with the creature. Katagiri wants Godzilla dead. Yuji wants to study and figure out how to predict Godzilla's movements so that humans and the monster can basically coexist. The Japanese Self-Defense Force, the JSDF, are also converging on Godzilla's location, and they claim they have this new type of weapon to use against Godzilla, which is called a full metal missile. These things can basically penetrate anything. In fact, the general guy running the show says that they are so powerful, they will go through Godzilla like crap goes through a goose. That's pretty colorful if you ask me. But guess what? The JSDF has almost no effect on Godzilla. He has no problem making landfall, and I think the plan was to attack Godzilla to make him advance into a trap for the JSDF tanks to basically light him up with these missiles. Now, I don't know, but he seems mostly annoyed by the new weapons, not exactly deterred or destroyed. The missile does seem to do a good job of blowing pieces off of Big G's skin, but Godzilla has a secret of his own. He can regenerate. So these missiles are better than what they've had before, but not a perfect weapon to stop Godzilla. So what about that mysterious object in the ocean? Well, while the JSDF deal with Godzilla, the object begins moving by itself and stands itself up perpendicular to the water. It then lifts itself out of the water, goes back parallel, and then takes off in the direction of the battle with Godzilla. Why is that? Well, it's attracted to the sound of the battle happening between the JSDF and Godzilla. This rock thing has like a scanning system that identifies Godzilla as something that it's potentially interested in. It positions itself in front of Godzilla and attacks with some sort of green gooey beam, knocking the big guy down. Godzilla struggles to keep his feet, but is able to blow some of the rock structure away from this object with his breath before the creature, which we later is manned by these things that are called Millenniums, retreats. Now, this portion that Godzilla has blasted away reveals something that looks like this really smooth, silvery spaceship. The CCI give the conjecture that these creatures, these otherworldly creatures, were coming from another galaxy and is attracted to light and radiation. Katagiri wants to find out what's inside the spaceship, and, of course, he wants to exploit it. But there's something worse. The Millennium escapes and shakes off all of the rocky covering that's on it to reveal this utterly smooth silver surface that's totally out of this world. It has all kinds of interesting powers. It seems pretty invincible. It has a deep interest in Godzilla, and it can also mutate and change the oxygen and atmosphere around it. The JSDF and CCI discover that the UFO is diurnal, and during the night it hibernates. But while it sleeps, it tries to gather information by hacking into electronics to discover information about Godzilla and anything else that can help it in its mission. It was sent here to establish a new empire for the Millenniums, and in order to do so, it has to change the Earth into something the Millenniums can survive, as well as wipe out any threats. Now, Godzilla himself is pretty interested in this Millennium object. It's not uncommon for Godzilla to want to wipe out anything that can stand up to him. So he arrives to see what's up with this UFO thing. The UFO starts messing with the atmosphere, but then tries to grab Godzilla and take tissue from him to morph itself into a new life form. And this thing is officially what's called Orga. Orga is successful in turning into some sort of globby tentacle monster, but it struggles with controlling the DNA of Godzilla as it continuously transforms thanks to the big guy's ever-regenerating cells. At first, it seems as though Orga is a little bit too much for Godzilla, but Godzilla sees his opening, quite literally. He sticks his head into the gaping maw of Orga's mouth, and he fires his atomic breath into the creature, completely blowing it up from the inside out. Now, Godzilla stands victorious, ultimately saving the Earth from being completely transformed into a planet for the Millenniums. But Godzilla is still Godzilla after all. He stops by to let Katagiri get a good look at him before killing him by bringing down the section of the building that he was standing on. Our surviving human characters watch as Godzilla continues to rampage Tokyo, pondering if maybe we have a little bit of Godzilla in each of us, just as Godzilla has a part of each of us in him as we kind of share this planet with him. So let's get to my 3 things that I like about Godzilla 2000. As I mentioned earlier, this show is all about finding the good in the monster movie, and it doesn't matter if it's a good movie or not, like Godzilla 2000, or a bad movie, I still will find 3 things that I like about the featured movie. Now, first up, I really like the opening scene to this movie. I compared it to something like Twister earlier, but if I'm being honest, it's really more like a Spielberg movie. The concept of a pair of nobodies having this equipment and knowledge and trying to use it to their advantage to show that they can predict Godzilla action is actually kind of interesting. It has that family feel to it that a lot of Spielberg movies had in the 70s and 80s too. However, the one main exception being that it's a father and daughter and not an absent father. But it goes from there to this very well done reveal of Godzilla. We don't see him very clearly at first. It's just his mouth, teeth, and eyes. Then we see his spines a little bit later, then a little bit more, and then a real close-up shot that we rarely got to see in a lot of the classic Godzillas before that exciting chase to get away from him. It's a fantastic start to a really good entry in the series. It also helps put the fear of Godzilla back into us once again, but with a little bit of a twist. And that actually leads to my second like that I'll point out here. Godzilla is a force of nature, and not so much that creature from man's mistakes, even though there is a very brief mention at the end about humans creating the monster. But because of this, Godzilla is something scientists and the military know what to do with. To a certain extent, at least. There are references to knowing that when Godzilla is attacked, he advances, he doesn't retreat. So they are able to build strategies around that specifically. Will that work? Well, this is a Godzilla movie, and we've never really seen human armies do much of anything against the big guy, so I think you know the result. But that's not really important, though. This concept means that while this is a direct sequel to the movie 45 years previous, rampages maybe have kind of continued, or at least Godzilla's emergence at the start of this movie wasn't the first since the 50s. We have the CCI, the GPN, and the JSDF all with their own knowledge of Godzilla that they've collected over the years. So yeah, we're not really wasting any time here getting reacquainted with Godzilla. He's just part of life for Japan. Thirdly, Orga is a very cool new creature. It's completely unlike anything we've seen before or since in terms of a Godzilla monster. It's almost more of an early Star Trek The Next Generation creature than anything we'd see in this series until it takes its final form. And what's more is that it uses an idea from the previous series with the manipulation of the Godzilla DNA, then using that to create a new being. It's also a pretty tough creature. Whether using its spaceship or once it forms into Orga, it's a bigger creature than Godzilla and gives the big G a run for its money. There are 3 distinct battles that are exciting as well. The first 2 feature Godzilla taking on the Millennium spaceship. The first has the ship knocking Godzilla around before the big guy is able to force the ship's retreat. The second was against the ship in Tokyo. And then, again, the Millennium knocks our hero around, and then that's where he steals some of the DNA to create the monster Orga. Of course, the third battle is against Orga directly that makes Godzilla look a little outmatched. That is until Godzilla gets swallowed up by the monster, and he uses his atomic breath to blow that mofo to pieces. Now, Godzilla 2000 is a very good entry in the franchise. It does a great job of combining all of the best elements that make for a great entry. Godzilla is in a lot of this movie too, and there's the second threat that gives Godzilla something to fight. The human story, which I didn't really get too far into when I was recapping the movie, is actually pretty engaging. While the early CGI effects aren't exactly great, it is trying some different things with angles and different shots that make this a really truly modern Godzilla flick. This should probably rank pretty high in most Godzilla fans' favorite entries list. Now that brings us to the close of this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Come back next week as we continue through the Millennium Era with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. Until then, stay spooky.